were able to get all of our team members virtual within a weekend because we had the infrastructure there. We had the storage, we had security. And so we also helped our customers do the same thing. So in unprecedented times when companies were closing all over the globe because of the pandemic, Dell was thriving because it was something we were able to support our customers with in order to build these clouds and servers and get everyone into this virtual space as they moved remotely. So Dell has been super successful over the years. I think it's been 33 years since Michael created his first laptop in his dorm room at the University of Texas. And so Dell has been amazing and continues to grow over the last couple of years. And so with that, it's not just about the revenue. One of the big things that we pride ourselves in is our culture. Next slide, thank you. Is our culture. And so not just kind of winning and beating in the marketplace with what we do, but also with what our team members say about us. These are just some recent awards that we receive, but we receive awards all the time about being the best place to work for LGBTQ, for those with disabilities. Our team members say we're the most loved company. Austin's statement said that we're the most loved company in Austin. And so there's just so many different awards that we win all the time because of our culture and because our team members really appreciate what we do and what we offer them, and also just the culture that we have in terms of building high-performing teams. And so I want to go back and just talk about, what a great organization is. And so like I mentioned, our strategy has been fantastic. We win in the marketplace. What great organizations need is a strategy that helps them to succeed. And so strong execution of a clear direction is key. And then also having a culture that enables that strategy. You can't just say, okay, we're going to set this vision and go tackle it. You have to have a culture, and your people have to be rallied around that culture that supports that strategy in order to execute the vision. And then leadership is key. So you have to put leaders in place to trickle that vision down. Culture starts at the top. And so you can't have a culture that doesn't match your strategy. You can't have leaders that are not aligned to what the culture is you're trying to create. All three of these things work together to really create great organizations. And so when you think about leadership, you think about people that are going to say you're creating a culture of collaboration because you want people to be able to collaborate and win together. You need leaders that are going to foster that environment. Say you have a strategy, say for like a sales team where you want a little bit of competition, making sure that your culture fits that kind of activity where you want competition, you want to foster competition where you have leaderboards in sales and you're trying to make sure that you're achieving the goals within whatever you're setting for your marketplace. So when I think about great organizations, these three things are really critical. But how do we build strategies? How do we shape culture? How do we make sure we have the right leaders in the right place? And so one of the things that I like to do is like, is anyone that currently has a job, are you satisfied with how much you're paid? Okay, if your boss is in the room, don't raise your hand, but are you satisfied with how much you're paid? Anybody? It's like, yes, I'm paid just the right amount. Right, okay. No one is actually ever going to say, yes, don't pay me any more money, right? And so no one's going to be like, we actually did this research where we looked at a bunch of IT companies, Microsoft, Google, Meta, Cisco, HP, we all got together and we looked at all of our questions that we asked team members. And across the board, the lowest going question, no matter what we asked, was always a compensation question. No one was ever going to be like, yes, we're satisfied with pay, or if you offer them more money, they're never going to say no. So then how do you design a strategy around compensation that's going to have an impact? How do you know what your compensation strategy should be? Like, what do you do if you know no one's ever going to be happy? If I'm a leader and I have people on my team, I have a certain amount of budget I can give in terms of bonuses, someone's always going to be unhappy if I give someone this bonus and they don't get one. And so you're never going to be able to please everyone in terms of building that strategy out of compensation. So how do you know which way to go and what to do? What about performance reviews? Does anybody just love receiving a performance review or even writing a performance review? All right, a couple people. All right, there we go. I love it. And so a lot of people do not. A lot of people feel like it takes a lot of time to write a performance review and receive that feedback can be incredibly uncomfortable. And most of the research says that people hate writing them and most people feel uncomfortable receiving them. So what's the best strategy for performance? What do you do? What's your strategy? Do you get rid of performance reviews if no one really likes them, or do you keep them? And so how do you make those type of decisions? What is culture? How do you define culture? I talked about culture being a key element. How do you define culture? If I was to ask everyone in this room right now, what's the culture at LA Tech? Would everyone say the same thing? Do people say different things? Would we all align? I don't know. How do you measure culture? How do you even decide what the culture of an organization is, right? And then also think of questions like people always say, people leave leaders, not companies, right? That's a common saying. People say they don't leave companies, they leave the leader. So then what leader behaviors are critical? How do you make sure that your leaders are shaping the right things if people are going to leave leaders? So these are all key questions that organizations try to figure out all the time. And so how do you go about answering those questions? Next slide. Thank you. And these are a bunch more. I won't go through all of them because we'll talk about them later, but just in terms of building diverse organizations and also incentivizing and motivating employees. A lot of times when we see these type of organizations face these questions, they use intuition. They're like, okay, if I want to incentivize my employees, I'm just going to pay them more. That's what my intuition says. That's my initial reaction. And so most companies, or a lot of companies, will rely on just what they've done in the past. They'll rely on the tried and true. They rely on all these different things, or they rely on just their gut reactions to things versus using evidence. And so what I'll talk about in the next couple of slides is really about using evidence to drive those decisions and not just relying on intuition. So when we talk about following the numbers, what I mean is using data to answer these questions and not just relying on what your initial reactions is or what your initial reactions are or what you've always done. And so at Dell, we believe that we fuel our advantage guided by science, data, and facts. And so to my point, it's not just about kind of relying on what we see in the research. Everyone feels like they're special. At Dell, we really do feel like we're special and unique. And so we try to make sure that we're using the voices of our team members and also marrying that with academic and other research that might be external to really build a solution that makes sense for Dell. And so we cater it using science and facts. We never really say anything. We never make any type of talent decision that isn't based on something that is evidence, that has science behind it, facts or data. And so I'll work through a couple of examples of what this all looks like. And some of those questions I had on that slide, I'll show you how we answered some of them in a way that was really meaningful. I think I've got about 7 examples to walk through. Oh, first, before I get there, Dell is not special. I didn't want to say that. There are many other companies that rely on data to make these type of talent decisions. These are just some examples of companies that I know that really do a good job of not just kind of putting out, not just making decisions without having data backing up their talent decisions. And so I wanted to make sure you all know that many companies are already doing this, and it's growing significantly. As a matter of fact, from 2020 to 2021, we saw 60% of companies said they increased their people analytics teams, and 75% said that they want to increase it in the future. And so this is definitely a growing field where we're seeing people are starting to really see the value in having data behind the decisions that they make for their people, and not just relying on kind of external trends or things that they see, but really using data on their people to drive those decisions. And the next slide just has a cool quote that I like from Don Klinghoffer from Microsoft, where she just says, if I've learned anything from the twin crisis of 2020 is that people analytics is at the center of everything. I love this quote because it really talks about how, and she says the twin crisis, she means the pandemic plus the racial reckoning in the US. And so many people relied on data. We couldn't rely on intuition. We were in unprecedented times, right? Like that we've never been in a global pandemic like that before, most of us in our lifetime, right? And then having the protests and all the racial reckoning happening at the same time. Companies couldn't say, let's go with the tried and true, what we always do. It was totally new and totally different. So we had to rely on data to make a lot of decisions, like our hybrid work strategies or vaccine mandates and all these different things. How do we increase inclusion, which I'll talk about a little bit in some of my slides. But it became this huge deal where we couldn't rely on intuition and the processes we already had, and we really had to shift to letting the numbers really tell us where we needed to head with a lot of our strategies with our people and our talent. Yes. Oh, thank you. Switch. This one is the right one. Okay, so I'll start with the first question. So how can we create a culture that everyone wants to be around? And so initially, probably intuition is like, make sure it's fun, right? Everyone wants a fun culture. So create a culture that's fun and engaging, and that everyone kind of feels like they feel valued and seen. That would be like my initial reaction based on my knowledge of what this question would be. One more click. Sorry, there's a lot of builds. But we did some research, and this was about 2016. So about 2016, Dell acquired a company the same size of it. So Dell acquired a company called EMC that had 70,000 employees, while we had 100,000. So we were already panicked because you're acquiring a company that's the same size of you. But then we also, geographically, this company was in Boston and we were in Texas. So just Hopkinton in Massachusetts, and we were in Texas. And so just with the geographical difference, you can assume, we assume there was definitely some like big cultural differences there, right? And then also different customers. Dell had at the time more laptops and more desktops, more small customers. EMC had these large storage service customers where they were serving massive companies. And so we knew from our initial reactions that this is going to be tough. These companies are absolutely totally different. How do we bring them together and make a culture that makes sense for both of them? And so that was our initial reaction, was like, this is going to be horrible, but we decided to use data instead. And so instead of just relying on what we thought, we wanted to use data. And so one of the things we did was we did surveys. And so we went to 50,000 Dell employees and we asked them to just select, what are the 5 attributes that you feel like will make Dell successful? Then we did the same thing at EMC. And we asked them, about 25,000 of them, what are some things that you feel like, what are attributes you feel like will make EMC successful? And we were very shocked when we got the same 5 attributes. And we did a bunch of research to get the list of attributes. We looked at academic research and we came up with like 100 of them. Then we shrunk it down to 30. And so they were able to select from 30 attributes, and they could write in more if they wanted to. But we were shocked when both companies had the exact same 5 as their top based on the results. So we're like, okay, we thought they would be drastically different, but at the end of the day, both companies want the same things and need the same things in order to be successful. So we did some focus groups to go make sure, we're like, okay, let's just double check this. So we went and talked to different team members on both sides and asked them like, hey, are you sure these are the things? And asked them for different behaviors and examples to make sure the concepts were the same. And then we landed, okay, this is our 5 values. And so the next slide shows our final culture codes. And this is still what we use today. This was in 2016 when we did this research. This is Dell's culture code. And so we aligned on our 5 values. Through the focus groups, we came up with 7 leadership principles, and then also behaviors of how we work and how we lead. And so when we announced as a new company with Dell and EMC together, then now called Dell Technologies with the family of companies, we had this culture to unite us, because we were like, hey, we talked to both sides before we were a company united. And this was exactly what we both companies said was key. So it was super cool to be able to use that data to really shape the culture of this new company as it came together at Dell Technologies. The next question, I can't see it on the slide because my face is in the way, but this one is about evaluating employee performance, I believe. Yes. There we go. There we go, evaluating performance. Thank you so much. Performance of employees. And so this one is, again, initial reaction, I would say performance ratings, right? That's what companies use all the time, performance ratings, to really drive these decisions. And so that's, most companies use them. Most companies have used them forever. It seems the most fair way to be able to just give someone a rating, call it a day. When we actually did research, though, Dell looked at and we analyzed engagement data. Next slide, please. Engagement data and performance data. And we looked at our performance ratings. We looked at best, great, good, mixed, and unsatisfactory, which were our ratings. And then we looked at engagement scores of those. And what we found was people that were negatively surprised. So say that I expected to be a best, and then I got a great rating. I was negatively surprised, had extremely low engagement, and they were also more likely to leave the company. And so we're finding that we were losing great talent because they were negatively surprised by their ratings. And so we were like, okay, we showed this data to senior leadership, and they were like, well, what do we do? How do we fix that? Because we don't want to lose great talent just because we're giving them a rating that's one notch lower than what they expected. So if I was expected a best and I got a great, I'm now lower engaged and more likely to leave. And so one of the things that we did with that, once we saw the data, we decided we won't do any performance ratings. Next slide, please. So Dell has had no performance ratings. This research was done in 2013. And since then, we have no performance ratings. So we used the data to figure out at Dell, performance ratings were actually having a negative impact on what we wanted it to be. And so we got rid of them. Instead, we have end-of-year reviews and consistent feedback and performance. So another example of just making sure that data is driving those talent decisions. Another one, how can we prevent our best employees from leaving? This one has been really important. I don't know if you've seen all the articles about the great resignation and all these different things that popped up over since the pandemic of people leaving organizations and companies. And so one of the big things here was we wanted to figure out, all right, people leave companies. If you want to prevent them, you just pay them more is kind of what intuition might say, right? If they would leave, you just give them some money, maybe they'll stay. We wanted to figure out exactly what our team members were saying, what might be leading them to leave. And so we did research looking at kind of what was driving attrition. And we found the number one driver was actually growth. People wanted to learn new skills. It wasn't even promotion. At first we thought, okay, people just want to be promoted. But when we dove into it, it was really about opportunities to be developed and learning new skills. But that's something that we can work on and improve. And that's something that's really manageable. That's not just giving money and promotions that's harder to give out more freely, but growing and developing our team members, we can put money and invest in that. The second one was energy. After the pandemic, members were burnt out. And so then people were leaving because of being just exhausted. And so we put a lot of resources into making sure that team members had support with work-life balance. We had a lot of campaigns from our benefits team to make sure that team members had flexibility and made sure leaders had trainings on how to make sure team members had the flexibility they needed. And then the third one was trust, making sure that your leader has earned your trust. So we did a lot in investing in making sure that team members and leaders had better relationships and trust. And so again, intuition was saying, you can pay them and they'll stay. Our data was showing, no, actually money was not the number one thing that was preventing team members from leaving. It was really having those growth opportunities that was the number one thing. Another one was remote work. This is my favorite one. So we did a lot with the hybrid work strategy after the pandemic. So Dell had a virtual kind of remote workforce since 2010. So we were unique in the fact that it wasn't something brand new when the pandemic hit. I have been remote at most of the years I was at Dell. I was only in the office for 2 years, and then I went virtual for most of it. I live 4 minutes from the office, and I probably go in once or twice a month, just because it was so much more flexible to be able to sit at home and fold clothes and in the middle of meetings versus going into an office and putting on a cap and a sweatshirt instead of having to get dressed up. So I decided to stay put at home for most of my career at Dell. But it was a unique situation that allowed us to do a lot of research where we did research before the pandemic hit on how our remote workers were doing. We also did some research afterwards. And so most people think that people that are not in the office are probably intuition or research or what people are saying or thinking is that people that are not in the office are not going to have the same opportunities as people that are in the office because they're not getting the same face time. They're not feeling the culture. They're not getting that same type of recognition that they would because they're not in the office like everyone else. But what we found was actually that 64% of our workforce were remote or hybrid before the pandemic. So again, like we already had a remote workforce before then. 93% said flexible work allowed them to be successful. And then when we compared our team members that were remote and hybrid to those that were in the office, we found no difference in having leader support. And you still felt like your leader was supporting you, still felt like your leader was inspirational. We found no difference in engagement. Team members that were in the office and team members that weren't still had the same kind of experience in our culture. We found no difference in commitment. No difference was found in voluntary attrition. So people were not more or less likely to leave the company because of where they worked or how they worked. And then we also found no difference in inclusion. Team members that were remote still felt like they had a voice and still felt connected to their coworkers. So even though there is this assumption that we kind of had that there'll be these drastic differences when you're not present, you're not in the office, we actually didn't find any differences, no significant differences there. And 91% of our team members said that they believe remote and hybrid work will have will have no impact or a positive impact on their career opportunities. So it won't actually impact them in a negative way. They didn't feel like it would. They feel like it's actually going to be positive. And this is probably because a lot of our workforce is global. And so being all over the world, it's very much easier. And so we do recognize that having that 64% probably does, our culture was already really welcoming to remote and hybrid work. But it's been really cool to see that our remote workers and hybrid workers do not have those same don't have the gaps that some people might think exist between those that are in the office and those that are not. Another one, does leadership make a difference in team performance? And so this one, I think I would say intuition would say yes. Leaders, we just talked about before, right? People leave leaders, not companies. And so we actually did some research to look at, does leadership make a difference in our teams? And what we found was that we looked at we pulled in sales attainment, we pulled in HR data, we pulled in engagement scores and all these different things. And we found that if a leader was rated high in inspiring leadership, they had the higher sales attainment. I was about to say the number, but I can't say the number. They had higher sales attainment than leaders that were uninspiring. We actually found that uninspiring sales leaders were costing our company $1 billion per year. When we pulled in sales attainment and we pulled in all the revenue, we were able to look at, okay, uninspiring leaders were actually costing us $1 billion. So while we can easily say, yes, of course, leaders matter, being able to put a slide like this in front of Michael Dell that, hey, you're losing $1 billion a year because your leaders are uninspiring was super impactful. And again, having those numbers to really back up the fact that this is how much leaders matter to our company was really helpful. So having that higher sales attainment for inspiring leaders and you didn't have a ton, but the few uninspiring leaders that we did have were costing us money because their teams were not performing as high as those that had inspiring leaders. And so those numbers really helped us be able to drive and hone in on the fact that leadership matters a little bit more than if we were to just say it. We now had data and numbers to back it up. And so it was super cool to be able to show this information too. I think this is my second to last one. Another one was managing diverse workforce and inclusion. And so this one has been really important in terms of just after the murder of George Floyd, a lot of work went into most companies started making goals to increase representation and diversity. But one of the things that were important to us was that we didn't just want to put numbers out there. We do have goals. We have goals by 2030 to have 50% women. We have goals to have 25% Black Hispanic in the US by 2030. But at the same time, we didn't just want numbers there. We really wanted to be able to show that we are also fostering an inclusive environment that keeps people there. Most, at least with Black Hispanic in the US, most people will get into the tech industry and leave within the first 2 years. And so we wanted to create a foundation and a culture that enabled people to feel seen and valued early on. And so we did a lot of research to figure out what are inclusive behaviors? What does a leader do that fosters inclusive environments in their teams? We looked externally, we put a lot of external research, we talked to team members, we got a lot of data from our team members about what they felt like was inclusive, and we merged those things together and came up with 10 core questions that we put into our employee engagement survey, which we call Tell Dell. I know, really catchy, right? And so once a year, we do our Tell Dell survey, and that survey allows team members to answer the survey, about 40 or so, sometimes 50 questions if I squeeze in my research questions in there, to answer all these questions. And then all of their leaders get a report. So 12,000 leaders get a report based on the responses of their teams. And then they sit down with their teams and they have feedback conversations. So when we added those 10 inclusion questions in there, now all 12,000 leaders sit down with their teams and they have a conversation about those scores. And so they sit there and they say, okay, whether the scores be low or high, they have a dialogue about those questions and they talk about how they can improve. They talk about where their strengths are. How do they continue to foster a more inclusive environment? And then we hold leaders accountable to those scores. So if a leader gets a 60% or lower on those scores of the first year, they get an optional consultation. If a leader gets 60% or lower for 2 years in a row, it's mandatory that they have to have a consultation with HR. 3 years in a row, they're out. They're no longer a leader or they're no longer working at Dell, one of the three. And so it allows us to now not just say that we're going to have these diversity goals, but also foster inclusive environments and hold leaders accountable for fostering those environments. And that way that team members continue to see valued and seen. And it's not just something where they come in and we get them in, we recruit them, we do a good job bringing them in, but they don't stay because we don't have the environment to foster them. Last one. How do we attract high quality talent? How can we get better employees? So this is just about recruiting, right? How do you bring people in? And so initial reaction, free coffee would be what I would say. I remember as an intern at Dell, I walked in, I was like, okay, cool. I got this nice tech internship. I'm going to come in, there's going to be nap pods and ping pong tables and free food. That was not that kind of company. No, I walked in and they were like, okay, it's going to be $7 for your tea. And I was like, okay. So the next day I actually came back with my own tea bag. I was like, I just need a cup. And they're like 25 cents. I was like, seriously, for the cup. So that was not, it's not that kind of culture. So when I think of like attracting talent, my immediate thought is like, all I need is free coffee, because it's not something I get. But when we actually looked at the data and the research, the number one thing that was driving and attracting and retaining talent was meaningful work. It had nothing to do with money, benefits, the office facilities. It was having your work be meaningful, which was super cool to see. And so one of the things we actually did was we created what we call a tip sheet for leaders about how do you make sure your team members know that their work is important. And that was key. We cut it across many different groups. We looked at this by diversity, we looked at it by generation. And I think for Gen Z, it was much stronger, meaningful work, but it was still the same for across all generations. People just want their work to be meaningful. They want to have purpose. And so that was the big thing for retaining talent. Again, we use data, numbers to really drive, okay, what's the behind this beautiful slide that my team created is a bunch of regressions and all kind of fancy science stuff, right? But at the end of it, we were able to show, hey, number one thing is meaningful work. And that's what our leaders now are making sure that their teams feel like their work is meaningful and they have purpose behind what they do, regardless of what their task in their day-to-day might be. So those are a ton of examples. I just wanted to drive home the point that a lot of times we make all these decisions based on intuition and kind of a lot of times we just think we know what's right. But when you actually dive into the data and you actually look at what's driving these different questions, what's behind these questions, asking team members, getting survey data, you end up finding there's often different solutions. And so when I talk about following the numbers, this is what I mean. It's not a big, it is a big deal. It's a lot of goes behind it, but it's not as fancy as it sounds, right? Following the numbers is just about making sure that you're relying on evidence instead of just your gut reactions. And so the point of people analytics in general is to drive optimal human decisions based on evidence, not intuitions, that help the business thrive. And there's a lot of work done. I think I read an article by McKinsey the other day that said that companies that use people analytics for their decisions have seen 80% higher in recruiting efficiency. They've seen, I think it was 50% decrease in attrition, and then 25% increase in business productivity. So using data to drive decisions is not just something for fun. It actually has a big impact on the bottom line. And it can drive culture, leadership, engagement, selection and hiring, learning and development, performance management, like I mentioned, and also promotions and succession planning. I did a talk last year with the US Treasury Department where I walked them through how to use data to plan their succession pools. And they were shocked. They're like, wait, they're like, so data is king. I'm like, yes, that was the quote of the day, was data is king, because it was a good way to not just say, okay, this person is going to succeed this person, but actually having data to say why that person will be the next person in that role. And so using data to drive all these talent decisions is really critical. But I always like to say this, no matter when I'm talking or how I'm talking, is don't forget the people and people analytics. I think there's an easy way of talked a lot about numbers and crunching and doing all these different things. But at the end of the day, there's people behind those numbers, and all these people have stories. And I think often we get so caught up in numbers and the 80% and 25%, we forget that there's a person with a life and a story and a background that needs to be shared too. That's why I like to always do focus groups and talk to team members, look at the comments, understand exactly what they're saying behind the numbers, because the numbers have a story behind them. They're still people. I was talking to Dell, the top reason people like to work at Dell is always workplace flexibility. Every year since I've been in Dell, always the top thing, because we allow such a flexible workforce. But I said 1 year, I was like, okay, I say that all the time. How do I make that real? And so I was talking to one of my team members who mentioned that her mom had cancer. And she was able, because of Dell's work flexibility, she was able to sit with her and work while her mom was doing her chemo for a year. And so she was like, that's what flexibility means to me. And so when I gave the talk about work flexibility being the best to our executive team, sharing that story put a whole different light on it. Even though they'd seen work flexibility all the time, sharing that story behind it made it more human. And so all of the numbers and the data can be there, but sharing those stories and remembering that there's people behind it is really critical. And that's why the psychology element of what I do is key. And having my PhD and my master's in IO psychology from LA Tech has been really impactful, because I not just look at the numbers, but I have that human behavior element that allows them to tell a story behind the numbers, that a lot of times data scientists and machine learning and AI, it doesn't do that. And so having that human element with the psychology piece has been critical. I think last slide. My favorite slide is my little boy. So that's me getting my master's, and that's me getting my PhD from Tech. And you can see how he's grown just in these slides. Imagine what he looks like now. If I was standing next to me, he's like hovering over me, but I still try to like stand up straight and make sure that I'm a little bit taller than him. But as I was preparing this slide, though, I actually went and pulled my letter of intent to Tech, and I found this quote that was in my letter. And so I put it up here, but it says, after earning a PhD in IO psychology, I would like to work in a corporation where I can provide employees with individual assessments and help them with balancing their work and family so they can realize their potential in the workplace. And I thought that was so cool, because I'm like, wait, that's exactly what I did. Like, I was able to accomplish it. And I just remember, I think I sat in Tillman's office when I first walked in, and I had my 1-year-old on my hip, and I was like 20 years old. And I was like, I want to get my PhD. And he's probably like, who are you? You know, and so as a single mom, just having the baby and doing papers and changing diapers at the same time, it's been a journey, but it's been an amazing one. And I'm so appreciative of the education that I was able to get at Tech, and going from that crazy looking person in Tillman's office to an award-winning IO psychologist has been a really big blessing. So I appreciate everyone, and thank you for your time. I think we were going to open for questions. Any questions?
Yeah, thanks, by the way. I'm sorry that I'm not be as eloquent as you were. My question will eventually be, how do you decide which research questions to ask? Slant, are there, for the 7 that you shared, are there 50 or 1,000 that you asked and your assumptions played out and went, great, we're not going to teach anyone anything new by that, or those valuable?
Yeah.
So those will have been my questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the categories that you shared, I'm trying to categorize the kind of work you did. Some of them were the how much does X affect Y? We know, or we believe that it does, maybe from psychology, maybe just from common sense and assumptions. We know that leadership affects sales performance. So let's go get some numbers behind that. I get that. Some of them are the how can we do X? How can we recruit top quality talent? We have a definition for top quality talent. We want to know how to do it. I get that too. Some of the questions, though, seem so foundational, like, do people even want performance evaluation? And I saw the really clever way that you all went about looking at the data there and saying, wait a minute, this might have a deleterious impact. Like, let's rethink that. What are we asking questions like, should we pay people? Should we chase them around with forks during the day? Should we, like, how do you know how far down in the foundation of the assumptions we make about interacting with people at work to go and say, wait a minute, at Dell, do we have data to support the assumption that you need to have lights turned on in the rooms that they're in, or that, you know, their keyboards need to work, or that I can just go on and on with things that seem batty to me, because not doing performance evaluation seems batty to obtain those data.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you know which questions to ask? How do you generate questions? And anything in that brain, I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
For sure. Yeah, it's a really good question. And it literally in the beginning of the year, my team will spend, well, actually before the year ends, like probably November, or October-ish, we'll spend like 3-4 days in our strategy session where we're like, okay, and before that 3-4 days, the team is preparing in advance, going through, looking at external research, looking at trends, looking at the academic research, what's coming, looking at business research, a lot of like what kind of the market research, and try to say, okay, what can we anticipate is going to be something we need to answer in the next year to the most of our ability. Of course, things like pandemics, you can never really anticipate, right? But we'll try and look at, okay, what's coming up? Like a big thing was like, okay, after the pandemic, hybrid work was the thing. And then there was great resignation. And so how do we pull what's going on in the industry and then anticipate how we can respond to it? And so we'll ask questions in our surveys, and we'll do focus groups based on what we anticipate is going to be a need coming forward. We'll talk to senior leadership. I think in January, I do rounds with all senior leaders and ask, okay, what is your roadmap? because the goal of my team is to answer questions for my leaders and for the company, right? And so I hope to like get their roadmaps and understand what they're trying to solve for. What are their tough questions? Like performance was a big one. Right now, we're still trying to figure out like potential and all these different things. And so going to talk to them, like, what's your heartburn? What's the problem you're trying to solve as a business leader? And then we go back and say, okay, how can we solve for that? What's things that we can research? What are questions we can ask? Where can we go focus that will help them answer the questions that they're trying to get at? And so a lot of it is internal research and external research, and that drives how our roadmap is shaped and where we kind of focus. To your question on of these 7, oh my goodness, yes, there's probably a million more. Even when I was putting this together, I had like a deck of like 30 slides. I'm like, I'm gonna get through all of these. So I pulled a lot of those out and landed on these 7. But to your point, there's been research questions we've gone through and be like, okay, that took us 3 months to do this research project. And at the end of it, it just nothing popped. Right. And so it's being okay with the fact that you might spend a ton of time working on something and it might not be successful, or it might not yield results that are useful. And so there's a lot of those where we're like, okay, that we asked that question in the survey and that was, ooh, let's not do that one again. And so we try to test them out. We have like, before we get to our May survey that goes to all 130,000 team members, we'll do like small pulses where we'll test questions out to see, okay, is this going to get us the right kind of data behind the scenes of what we're actually trying to get at? And we'll test things out before we actually put them in that May survey to make sure that we're asking it the right way. We don't need to tweak it and things like that in advance. But there's a lot of trial and error. But for the most part, and I love this about Dell, is that I have a lot of autonomy to go do those research projects. No one says, hey, Stephanie, what are you doing? They kind of trust my expertise, where I'm like, hey, and I always have the research to back it up. I'm investigating this because here's what so-and-so said, or here's what the research says. There was another part to your question that I don't think I answered.
Oh, I can't remember it either. Thank you.
Sure.
A non-work related question.
Yeah.
Given now, and as an IO psychologist, if you were looking back to your college self, or if you were looking back to your graduate school self, and saying this is a bunch of grad students and undergraduate students here, what would you tell yourself? If there's something that you would say, pay more attention here, or like, don't, whatever it might be. Do you have a separate message to those earlier Stephanies?
Yeah.
Repeat the question.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So the question was, what would I tell my earlier self in college or in grad school that might be helpful for me? There's a bunch of things that I probably would tell that poor Stephanie, but I think the number one is to give myself grace. I think there was a lot of times where I felt like, again, single mother balancing a child on my hip, and had a ton of really amazing family support. We were talking about it earlier. My parents would come down, my brother would come down and just help out just so I could get through school. But I think I was harder on myself than I needed to be. I think there was definitely times when I would mess up, or if I didn't get all of the A's or things like that, and I was tougher on myself. And then getting out and realizing how much, I shouldn't say that to my faculty, how much some of those things didn't matter. And so how much like I was hard on myself and I didn't really need to be. And so I think I would go back and really make sure that I took the time to really focus on things like broader concepts. If I were at an article and I didn't get through the full entire thing, but I got the concept, that's okay. And like reading every single word doesn't always matter. I think there was so much time spent trying to be perfect, when really I just needed to make sure I was understanding the concepts, because that's what I apply at work on a day-to-day basis, is those concepts and those really the ability to be curious. And I think storytelling, I was talking to some of the students earlier, is the biggest thing that I would say I would focus on the most, being able to translate what I learn into a way that someone that doesn't have any idea what I do could understand. And I think that's huge, taking all the science, everything that you learn in academia, but being able to say in one sentence, what do you do? Or in one sentence, what does that really mean? Putting on a slide and putting circles on the slide, like you saw in the deck, simplifying all of it. Like you can't imagine how many steps went into those 7 things you saw. Tons of years of research, some of them, right? But simplified into one slide so that a leader could understand it. And then telling it in a story that flows is really critical. So I think I would tell myself to play on that skill set a lot more and to ask more questions and be curious, because even when I got to Dell, that is what got me to coming from an intern to leading the People Insights team, was being curious and asking questions. And so honing that skill in grad school and undergrad would have been important as well. Yeah.
Like a lot of other, they're doing that. On your specific team, like, y'all all have some kind of like, all of you degree, or do y'all all focus on the different aspects of people?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So we got a mix of people. So the question was, how does my team kind of shape? Is it all psychology or just kind of a mix of people? So it's a mix. So I have 3 IO psychs. And then I have someone that doesn't even have a college degree, right? Just kind of really good at doing data analytics. I have project managers, I have people with master's degrees, I have people with undergrad degrees. So it's a really good mix of people. And I feel like that diversity of thought is what makes us successful. Got people that were just HR business partners, people that kind of didn't even come from the HR world. And so just kind of a mix of just thought. Then we sit down in a room, and when we're coming up with like a survey question, having all those different perspectives, I think is what allows us to land in a really great place. But mostly data folks, IO psychologists, and project managers are on the team.
What those slides you mentioned that we won't find for face to face to, I believe, leadership.
No, yeah.
So do you think that there'll be a difference if you look at remote work versus hybrid work instead of looking at those two things?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question was, do I think there'll be a difference between remote and hybrid, and not just looking at remote, hybrid, and face-to-face? Yeah, it's a great question. And we did look at it. We did cut the data by all 3, and we ended up lumping remote and hybrid together because they were so similar. Like I'm actually listed as in the office in the system, but I'm technically remote. And people that are hybrid are really only showing up like once or twice a week, if at all. And so because our culture, again, was already so flexible, a lot of people are like just not going into, we actually have the problem of people not coming into the office. So we did end up lumping them together because when we split them up, they weren't significantly different enough. Yeah. Great question.
On a similar topic to that, regarding your findings of the flexible workers not feeling excluded, or still where the culture of the workplace is still in play, do you think that's a uniquely Dell occurrence because you've been incorporating the flexible remote work for so long before other companies? Or do you think that this might be a more generalizable occurrence of the flexible workers that are not in person, still having benefits?
Yeah, it's a great question. So repeating the question. So it's basically, do I feel like it's unique to Dell, the fact that those that have these flexible work arrangements, there's no difference between those in office and those that are not? I would say Dell is a leading indicator, is how I describe it. I feel like because we started earlier, we're at where companies might be 5-6 years from now. Right now, I think there is a difference. I think people are doing forming, storming, norming, right? They're trying to figure out this whole hybrid thing. We actually had this slide that I was going to put in there that shows the chaos, right? People don't know what is hybrid. Is hybrid mandatory you come in 2 times a week? Is it 1 time a week? Is it 3? Is it you can go flexible? No one really knows. So I think the world right now is just swirling around what this looks like and how that works, versus, to your point, Dell having been in this space for many years, I think we've done the forming, storming, norming, and we've settled. And so this is what I think Dell is what it will look like once companies get to where we are. Yeah, good question.
How much do you, so these seem like insights, and some of them seem like actionable insights, but some of them seem a little bit distant from the actual actioning stage. So first of all, if that's incorrect, please put it back. But if it is correct, how much are you a partner in suggesting actions that can be taken, or how much are you like your deal with these data, upper management?
Yeah, great question. So we try not to do anything that can't have an action behind it. So even coming up with some of those leader kind of meaningful work being important. Like I said, we created a tip sheet out of that to make sure leaders know what meaningful work is and how to create that. So we try to make sure that we're answering questions and things that are important to the business enough where they can take an action from them. So it's a great question. And so I would say we're more of a partner. Once we get to the point where we found the analysis, I was talking to them earlier, and we might create the tip sheet that goes out to the leaders, but comms is going to send those out. We don't do the consultations for the inclusion piece. So we create the strategy behind it, but then regional HR will go do those consultations with leaders. Some of the data senior leadership has to take action on. Some of it is like, okay, that's something like the performance ratings. They went and asked a bunch of executives before they got rid of it, like, everyone okay? And at the end of the day, Michael and the executives made the decision to drop performance ratings based on our data. And so a lot of times we don't hold the decision-making power in those, but we help kind of just provide the data and guide the strategy. The hybrid work, when we pulled all of our data together and saw that some people wanted to be hybrid, some people wanted to be remote, some people wanted vaccine mandates, some people didn't want to get a vaccine. It was all over the place. So we decided flexibility. So Dell doesn't have a policy. You can show up to the office, you cannot. All of our team members wanted different things, but that decision to do the flexible strategy was set by senior leadership. We just provided the data to help aid in that decision-making.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Been told there are Q&As on the Zoom.
How do you link performance to compensation then without ratings? Oh, how do you link performance to compensation without ratings? We trust our leaders. We train them. We try to make sure that leaders understand biases. We do office hours. We have conversations with them. They still have end of year reviews where they have conversations, but they're qualitative. They qualitatively write a paragraph or a document. For my team, I do word clouds because I'm nerdy. So I create word clouds for them, and I do put I get feedback from their peers, and then I have like a document and I give them all details about skills they can develop. And I spend way too much time on it, but they find it super helpful in detail, but it's a Word doc. So instead of getting your best, they get this really detailed Word document to go develop. And then as I write those documents out as a leader, that helps me. So when I come to compensation conversations, I'm like, okay, I just had these detailed qualitative reviews. So I know what to do in terms of making those decisions because I had to think through all of it. I had to get their peer feedback and put it in there. And so it actually becomes a lot easier for me to make those decisions after having to put so much thought into it versus just giving them a good or best or a rating. And so compensation, we do kind of make there's checks and balances in place for compensation, of course, but for the most part, we trust our leaders to do the right thing. And if they're not making good decisions, shouldn't be a leader. What's the number one recommendation you have for someone who would like to pursue a career in people analytics? Yeah, I would say back to the people part, I say make sure you keep people at the center, and the storytelling is key. Being able to tell a story with data is a unique skill set. I always tell people when I find someone who can do all the nerdy stuff on the back end, but then simplify it where I don't even know they did it, find a unicorn. So I would definitely say for those wanting to pursue people analytics careers, making sure that you know how to do the data and you're really strong in your stats, but you also know how to talk to people about it in a way, but they don't even know you did all that stats behind it. And where it tells a story where at the end of the day, people can go take an action from it. A lot of times I even catch myself being like, "Ooh, this is interesting. But it's not just about doing what's interesting. It's about doing what's meaningful to your customers and to your clients and your stakeholders. Cool.
Well, I have several people to thank. Thank you, Dr. Murphy, Stephanie. I want to thank you all for coming and your great questions, and those of you who've joined us online. I also want to make a special thanks to our tech donors who made this possible. This series is being funded through the Louisiana Tech Foundation, and that is just an amazing statement of support that we get from our donors, and I want to thank them and the dean, and certainly Rosalind Gillum and others in the dean's office who made this possible. But most of all, I want to thank Stephanie.